So I expected her to have a bad reaction and sort of blame it on me as if anybody could make anybody trans. And I was so scared to tell her. And as soon as I told her, the first thing she said was, everything's going to be okay.
You're listening to Find the Good News, episode 99, The Mother's Refuge, a Beacon Series conversation featuring Paria Hassouri, MD, author of Found in Transition, A Mother's Evolution During Her Child's Gender Change by New World Library. Find the Good News is produced by Parker Brand Creative Services, a branding agency that thinks sideways, pushes forward, and gets your brand up. See what else we do at parkerbrandup.com. It fascinates me how easy it can be to congratulate myself on being open-minded, all-inclusive, and accepting of others. My self-praise doesn't end there, as I'm always ready, it seems, to easily forgive myself for the secret judgments and grudges that I don't speak out loud for the world to hear. It's not very difficult to envision oneself as some type of enlightened being with an expansive and compassionate heart when we're never presented with information or circumstances that threaten the levees that protect us from all the varieties of human existence that color our world. This may seem like a strange way to lead you into my conversation with Paria Hassouri, MD, author of Found in Transition, A Mother's Evolution During Her Child's Gender Change. But after reading her book and visiting with her, I quickly learned that for all the heart and mind work that I claim to do, I still have old mazes to navigate, filled with lingering fears. Paria's work is an honest one, a memoir free from the veneer of personal perfection that we've grown accustomed to, a type of tailored-for-consumption presentation that I myself am often guilty of. I was watching my mind as I read this work of hers, looking to see what thoughts would arise, almost as if I already knew on some level that I would feel the sting of my own boundaries to accept others for who they are. The truth was that I was afraid to meet the limits of my understanding. What I discovered in Paria's book and in our conversation was that the way to expand my love was to meet those limits and not turn away. The journey of shock, pain, confusion, acceptance, renewal, and love that Paria and her daughter go through is enlightening. It has not only given me a more nuanced understanding of my expanded human family, but it also provided me the opportunity to feel textures and wounds inside me that I'd never touched before. When we are given the chance to see old wounds, we can lay hands on them to heal them. I am thankful for Paria's courage and willingness to share her book and time with me. Now, it's time to lay old fears aside, seek out our tender hearts, make room for all the varied children of the earth, then tune your attention to this good news beacon and press play on a little good news.
Wake up, it's morning, you're dreaming up a story, I can hear the way it's going, 'cause you're laughing in your sleep, on the path to your deliverance. In a holy wall of light pouring through your window.
Old news, bad news, fake news. Sometimes you want to shut those signals down and seek a better source. With my Find the Good News Beacon series, I tune into good people doing good works wherever I can find them. I scan across the full spectrum of life, seeking out human beings that have turned their dials towards helping others, aligning their time, resources, and talents with goodness, justice, mercy, and love. In each episode, I sync up with the hearts and minds of my extraordinary guests. We have dynamic conversations that invigorate the mind long after our transmission has ended. I discover the critical life experiences that shape them, the perspectives that drive them, and the fundamental beliefs that have anchored them to a path of goodness. There's a lot of background noise in the world. My name is Orrin Parker, and I'm cutting through the static to find the good.
I love you just as well.
If you don't mind, for my listeners, if you could give me a quick overview of who you are and who I'm talking to today, that would be fantastic.
Sure. My name is Paria Hassouri. I'm a pediatrician and mother of 3 in Los Angeles. I'm also an Iranian American immigrant, And one of my children is transgender, and I've written a memoir about my experience of sort of walking through her transition with her.
Okay, so that this book, I kind of wondered what it was going to be like for me reading this. My son is gay, and I wondered if there was going to be any kind of common ground that I could find in that experience of him coming out, or things that I saw through his life. And I did find so much common ground with your experience. But oddly enough, I found more common ground in the experience I had with my daughter, who is not gay, not transgender. But there were things that you were saying in this book that I was going, oh my gosh, I get this. I get especially some of these feelings you had right at the beginning. And one of the things right out of the gate about your book, that it was just the beginning of the story where you got the phone call from the school. And you were so honest in your book, and that's another thing that I loved about it. I was like, she's just telling you the truth. I mean, it was so peeled back. And I'm so thankful that you did that, because I immediately went, oh man, she's saying like what I felt, because you got that phone call, and the way you expressed it was like another phone call from the school.
Right.
And I just, right out of the gate, I felt that, because I had been through that kind of experience. And I was like, man, I remember that so well, just feeling like what else could possibly happen. You'd get a reprieve, life would sort of get normal, and you felt like, okay, things are okay. And I kind of remember feeling like I was always holding my breath, sort of waiting for the next phone call. And you just kind of expressed that, and I went, wow, okay, so here we go. Not the same exact issues, but very similar experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's parenting. This is what all of parenting is. The whole idea was to write a book that would have just universal appeal, not just, be something for parents of trans kids, but would, every parent, every person would be able to relate to on, some level. And then during the process, they would also get some, exposure to what it's like to have one of your children, be trans and transition. But yeah.
One of the unique.
So thank you.
Yeah, well, that was the tone of your whole book so far, as far as I've been through it. And the other thing that really I thought was different about your memoir here is that I guess we assume, and I can say this with my son too as well. I had almost the opposite experience with him. My son, and if you don't mind me sharing that, I think it might be interesting to hear how you feel about this. When my son was 2 years old, I remember I had just gotten divorced, and I was kind of seeing this woman, and my kids were around, and one morning, he was still in diapers. I mean, just potty training. And he picked up a brush, and she had called me in the room, and she said, Oren, come here, come see what he's doing. And he was combing her hair, just so lovingly, slowly, and just petting her hair. And she was like, this is such a weird experience, but he was mesmerized by it. But then I noticed that started to emerge as he was interested in hair products and bows and then Barbie dolls that had long hair and fixing their hair. Well, that I never discouraged it, but he just did not gravitate towards trucks and army men and action figures and comic books. It was always like makeup and girl colors and things that were traditionally related to, that we would consider female toys, right? Or at least society considers female toys.
Right.
Well, I just said, I rolled with it. And I just said, whatever this is, it is. I don't know what it's going to lead to. And there were some people that were like, oh, you need to tell him not to do that or teach him. I'm like, well, I don't feel that way.
Right.
But then, and I always said as he would get older and these things continued, to be in his life and he was attracted to those things, I always had in the back of my head, and I discussed it with my wife. I said, if he were to tell me that he were gay, or if he were to say, oh, I'm having some gender identity issues, that would not surprise me. It wouldn't come at me like out of left field. But I'm reading your book and I'm going, you didn't have any of that like I had.
Right.
You didn't have any, oh, maybe one day, like I'm probably going to need to prepare myself for this and start reading or learning how to make this transition or this shift. You just like found out one day all of a sudden, right? 13 years old, correct?
Yeah. So my daughter didn't have any of that. She didn't have an interest in, makeup, dresses, girl traditional,
Right.
toys would be when she was younger. So I really had never for a second thought that she might be trans. I, for all of my kids, I think the possibility of them being gay was, something I was always aware of, because I felt like that's not necessarily something that you would show until later. That that makes sense. That maybe you wouldn't discover that about your child until they start puberty. But I always thought that if your child has any sort of gender identity issue, that would present itself early, from when they're, toddler or a little kid. And, when she came out at 13, she had never really done, anything that would make me think that she might have any question about gender. I mean, she was never like the sporty kid, but she liked to play with cars and little trains and Legos and play Super Mario. I mean, she was just like the
Any
Lego
kid,
Super
yeah.
Mario,
Right.
not sporty kid, but not anything that we ever thought, is feminine or we associate with female gender identity.
Yeah. It's interesting reading a book like yours, and I wish where I live and where I'm at geographically, I always wonder if someone is just going to randomly pick a book like this and go, hey, this is something that I have a bias about. I feel strong. Like right now, today, I feel like I could say, oh, that's wrong, or something like that, something very harsh and with a line on it. And would they have the wherewithal to go, this is obviously something I feel this way about. I should read this to see if it would open my mind. Now, that takes like a big step for a lot of people to go into territory like that. And as I was reading your book, it's funny because I don't consider myself to be filled with biases, but I love to watch like sort of the background noise when I'm reading a book. And the truth of the matter is, and this is just like a total confession, I started to see my own little biases. Even as someone, I'm sitting here going, I think I'm this enlightened person. I'm raising a gay son and it's all good. And I'm stand right by his side, through the whole journey. I have zero problems with this.
Right.
And as I'm reading your book, I would have these little feelings that would come up and go, like I would make these weird justifications. Mm-hmm. And then you would turn around in the book and it was almost like you were reading my mind, because you would go, yeah, well, I would think, well, my husband, he performs these types of surgeries, so maybe this is because of X, Y, Z. You're doing all these little math equations. Well, I could see those same equations like running around in my head.
Right.
As I'm reading your book. And I thought that was really, and I hated even admitting that. I mean, because I don't want to believe that, but it was just the truth.
Right. Well, imagine what it's like to admit all that in a book that everybody can read, because I always considered myself really open-minded, enlightened person.
Right.
And I think I was open-minded in regards to everything but being trans. And trans was, I think, what part of it was that I just wasn't, a big part of it was just that I was completely blindsided and not expecting it for my child. But for me to blame all of it on that and say that there must have not been a part of me that actually have implicit bias against trans people would be, not being honest. Because, when I read back my own words or think about my thoughts, I realize that there's no way that 100% of how I reacted could be attributed to, being blindsided by my child's coming out. There had to be a part of me that what did have some implicit bias towards trans people, and I had so much ignorance regarding, what it is to be transgender and how transgender, kids present, and what, and ignorance leads us to think all kinds of, have
Right.
all kinds of thoughts and have all sorts of reactions that we shouldn't have. So, yeah.
Yeah. Something that one of the takeaways that I had, and another thing that I felt common ground with you on, was when you started talking about being an immigrant or coming from an immigrant family. I really didn't expect that in the book either. That kind of came at me from another direction, and I stopped for a little while at one point, and I don't remember where it was, but you were talking about that experience, but it was like I was having this realization too, especially with my own experience with my son, because I realized that some of my behavior was due to my own experience as a child who was bullied, and so that I kind of carried that into what you experienced as an immigrant being. You said that you were in the 5th grade in 1983, right after the Iran hostage crisis, right? And so being an immigrant, that like completely paints your life, right? I mean, you were just giving a description of sitting in the back of the classroom or sort of being alienated. And I was like, man, okay, so I was in the 5th grade in like 1984, and I didn't have that experience, but I was being bullied and picked on by kids right around that time period. That painted my life, like that time period. And then when my son started telling me, hey, I think I'm gay, I do think this, all of that just sort of kicked in. I immediately went, oh my God, he's going to be bullied and tormented by society. He's not going to be accepted by people. He's going to be called names. He's going to be outcast. He's going to be shunned. And it made me afraid. And I was afraid to admit that, honestly, until I was sitting there reading your book. I was like, so much of the way I navigated that was really my own fear. And my own experience had nothing to do with him. Right. Did you? And it seems like you had a similar experience.
Absolutely. Well, I love that you are relating to so many parts of this book, because here we are, two people who, on the outside seem, very different, living in different, completely different areas of the country, had different childhood experiences, yet the same,
Yeah, isn't that wild? I mean, that just shows you, right? I agree with what you're saying there.
Right. And so, so I think a lot of it was, I definitely being bullied in the 5th grade caused me to then be insecure all my rest of my middle school and high school years and be sort of, alone, and really, in some way affected me for the rest of my life, having that insecurity because of that year, and then feeling the need after that I need to constantly like prove myself or prove my worth or prove, who I am. And so, when she came out, all the fear that I had about, I said, this is the experience I had, and it affected me so much. And her experience could potentially be 10 times or 20 times or 100 times worse than my experience, as a trans teenager. And so I was so afraid, and that fear was causing so much noise in my head that I just couldn't really see her or listen to her with an open mind
That's the thing about fear, and I talk about this all the time on this show. It's not what I intended for the show to be about, but it has really become that, really about the high value of digging into the past of who we really are and figuring that stuff out. Because man, I have learned that so many decisions are just old fears just lingering around like cobwebs. And I think I'm making this decision with wisdom and discernment and intelligence. And really, it's all just sort of underneath it all. There's this foundation of old childhood fear. There was one part in your book and maybe it isn't a big deal, but I felt myself holding my breath. There was a part where you were talking about, you were almost imagining all the negative things that your mother was going to say to you.
Right.
And I felt myself holding my breath. I was like, oh, I know this feeling. I had a similar relationship with a parent, and I was always afraid of like accusation and condemnation. And so I would do that before, like, oh, they're all, I already knew what they were thinking.
Right.
And I was having the conversations with them in my mind. And so I was like, really kind of like, I could feel myself getting anxious. And then your mother doesn't say any of those things.
Right.
And I went, oh, I was like I was in an action movie watching a cliffhanger. And I wonder, did you have that kind of, was that accurate?
Yes.
The way you felt?
I mean, I was basically dreading telling my mother. I was afraid that she would blame it all on me, as if my poor parenting had caused this, or, you know, my spending too much time on, you know, on myself and, you know, my work, my hobbies, my friends, whatever had caused me to not give her enough attention and time and not parent her the way I should. And therefore, you know, now she was saying that she was trans. And so I expected her to have a bad reaction and sort of blame it on me, as if, you know, as if anybody could make anybody trans. And I was so scared to tell her. And as soon as I told her, you know, the first thing she said was, everything's going to be okay. And I almost was like, did she hear what I just said to her?
Right.
You know, so I repeated what I had told her and spelled it out to make sure that she understood, you know, what I was telling her. And again, she was like, everything is going to be okay. And it was like the biggest weight was lifted off my shoulder. I mean, it was like as if there was an elephant on my chest, like stepping down, I couldn't breathe. And she said, everything is going to be okay. And like the elephant took his, you know, foot off and I could breathe again. And that's what makes me so sad is, you know, my mom was able to do that for me. But, you know, when Ava first came out to me, you know, I didn't do that for her. I didn't say everything's going to be okay. I said, no, you know, this is not happening. You're not trans.
Yeah. Listening to you tell that story, I mean, I just, again, not to keep beating that fear horse to death, but I just kept feeling like that in listening to your story, that had so much to do with it, that it would just seemed like it wasn't so much about you, that you had a lot of fear for you. You really seemed to have a lot of fear for Ava. Like, she's gonna go. I just want to make sure, like, this is actually what this is. I don't want her to be, God, I don't like to say it this way. I'm just going to say it bluntly, like messing her life up. Like, I don't want her to be tormented and to have to go through all the struggles. Because, I mean, you know, looking out in the culture, you see, I mean, especially now, I mean, while there is more information, there's more openness, there's also sort of this rhetoric of hate and aggression as well that has risen up, especially in the last, you know, 4 or 5 years.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, you fear for your child. So it seems like it was not so much about you, and I might be wrong, but at least my takeaway wasn't that you could accept it. Right. But you really were worried almost. Right. Is that accurate? Am I wrong?
Yeah. So I had fear on multiple levels. So, you know, one was just the fear of letting a teenager, you know, make some decisions that she might regret. And then ultimately, you know, I'd be the responsible, you know, one for that. But that fear, you know, with getting more, you know, information, that fear, you know, that this was a temporary thing, you know, went away as I started to realize, no, this is truly who she is. But then, you know, there was a fear for her safety, fear for her being lonely, and fear for her life being limited by being trans. I mean, all of us want our children to have unlimited potential and all, you know, possibilities and, you know, be able to do whatever, you know, they want in life and reach their highest potential. I mean, that's what all parents want for their kids.
Right.
And I was afraid that this was going to limit her life, that she would get discriminated against when she would apply for jobs in the future, that she would have a hard time, potentially finding a partner, that every time she walked into a room, people would look at her and see her, as a trans person before they would see everything else, that she is.
Yeah, gosh, I understand all of that, even just from the same feeling. I've thought about this many times, all of my own worries about the things going on with my son. I thought, as he enters high school, for me, having a first kiss is not an issue, or dating a bunch of different people, no one cares. Going through the process of finding a partner and breakups and all the things about relationship, intimacy, even heavy petting and things like that are a part of adolescence. All of that stuff, I went, okay, all of that's going to be more complicated for my son. And that did make me sad, because I thought, he's going to go to school. Well, typically you're around those people. That's your sort of dating pool, that's where you're meeting people. And if you don't work out, it's no big deal. But in his situation, I thought, well, he's not going to have that many people to have relationships with, because there aren't as many gay boys at school, and if there are, and he may not be attracted to them, and then it's just it has made life a little bit different. I mean, I'm not going to lie, it has made it a little more I hate to say lonely, but a little lonelier to some degree for him. I could say, his relationships that he has are really intimate and strong, but his intimate, the personal ones that are like more romantic, they're very they don't exist, because he's isolated to some degree, and so that is the truth. And I thought, it is hard for kids that are going through any kind of I don't think people think about that part too much. I really don't. I think they just sometimes want to go, oh, that's not the norm, or that's an aberration, and it's not and they get more hung up on that. They don't think they're just human beings. They still have the same needs and desires and wants to have joy and happiness and love and all these things that we all take. I mean, I squandered those things in my youth. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I'm watching my son, and I'm going, he would cherish to have some of the things that I just took for granted at his age.
Yeah. Yes.
Do you have that kind of feeling? I mean, similar?
Yeah. I mean, I think, the other thing is, and despite it being so much harder for them, it's still would be much harder for them to not live as their true, authentic selves.
Right.
And, that's the part where, I wish, people could, see and understand better over time. It's so much worse and more unbearable for them to not be their authentic selves, that they're willing to, go through whatever is, necessary, and whatever hardships, come with being able to, be who they actually are.
Yeah.
And it, and while, as, other teenagers may get to just sort of be teenagers, teens who are trans or gay or something else going on, they're spending their teen years, like, every day is an act of, like, courage and bravery.
Yeah, right.
While just being who they are and stepping out into the world.
Yeah,
and that's a lot to carry at that age.
It really is. I can feel that gravity. I felt it in your book. I could feel it even a little bit on look, the other day we were on the river, and there's up in Natchitoches, Louisiana. It's a really beautiful riverfront. My son loves to go roller skate out there, and he has these bright orange roller skates. He's 17. Beautiful kid, and he takes his shirt off and he gets in the sun's on him, and he's skating down the riverfront, and I'm watching him, and I'm like, he's beautiful. I mean, like, I'm just thinking about how much I love him and how he's free to be, you know, this beautiful person. And as I'm sitting there having those thoughts, these young guys his age are driving over the bridge on the pickup truck, and they're yelling. He had his earphones in, but they were yelling, you know, slurs at him. And I was like, isn't this incredible? And he was oblivious. And later he goes, were those guys like yelling something? I said, yeah. And I didn't tell him what they said, but it was just like, I hope that we get to a point in the world where people can see people just as who they are, as beautiful, the beautiful beings they really are. I wish that those boys could love him the way I love him, you know. Probably the way you feel about Ava too, you know. You wish people could just love her. And I mean, they probably do. Your book probably has helped a ton with that. I mean, to really put that out there.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think if we all really just took the time to get to know each other and see each other, we would be living in a different world, and it would be a much better one. And hopefully over time, we'll slowly get there. But yeah, I mean, you know, I think that's the thing. I think, you know, if somebody just looks at Ava, you know, one of the first things they may notice about her is that she's trans. But if really somebody just takes 2 minutes to talk to her, you know, there's so much, you know, like the trans thing just goes out the window, because then they just realize what a overall, you know, incredible human she is.
Yeah.
You know, so
how did you see Ava change as you began to really, I guess, have more acceptance of what was happening? How did you see her change? I mean, did that affect like the gravity of those two things, the orbit?
Yes. Yeah. It was really once I decided to start accepting and supporting who she was, and really I changed my outlook from, you know, being pessimistic about her future to being optimistic about her future. That, you know, like that, letting go of that negativity really just changed the overall mood in our house.
Yeah.
And she was able to really start thriving. You know, she was able to really start being who she is. And, you know, and that translated into, you know, I was worried that she was going to lose all her friends, and she was not going to be able to make friends. And she actually, I mean, she did lose some old friends, but she made a lot of new friends, and, you know, was able to make better friends than she ever has before, because she was actually being, you know, her authentic, you know, self. And, you know, so then now she has, you know, more friends than she's ever had. She's so much happier. She's, you know, before she came out, she struggled off and on with depression, and we could never figure out what was, you know, the root cause of her depression. And she is so much happier now. I mean, she smiles brighter and bigger than she ever did before. Her eyes have a light in them now that, you know, was gone for years. And I think really things started to change for her when we started to support her. Yeah. And when her home went from being a place where we were arguing about whether or not, you know, she could transition or was trans or, you know, whatever, to her home going to being a safe space where she could 100% be, you know, authentically herself.
Right. And shouldn't home be that? I mean, right. That's one of the things that makes me so sad so often in the world, is that sometimes home isn't the safe space for a lot of people. And, you know, gosh, I mean, you want it to be a refuge, because if home's not a refuge, they're going to run, especially children, they'll run into other refuges that maybe don't have their best interest, you know, in mind.
And, you know, I mean, for me, I remember when I was growing up and in my lonely sort of middle school teen years, I mean, I would spend, you know, every school day waiting until I could get home. And it was like, once I got home, I felt like I could breathe and be myself.
Yeah.
So home was like my safe space. And, at one point, especially when, we were at this meeting and this one therapist said to us, don't be your child's first bully, was such,
Oh, wow.
it was such an impactful moment for me because, I realized, it made me realize for the first time that maybe home wasn't this, was I not making home the safe space where she could be exactly, who she is. And obviously in our home, it was never unsafe in terms of like physical harm or anything like that. But it wasn't, there was a time period where it wasn't a place where she could be exactly who she was, you know, and once we changed that, she just took off in terms of her happiness and thriving and flourishing.
Man, that's such a powerful thing. Don't be your child's first bully. I mean, I wonder how many parents are thinking that that's what they are to their child. I mean, really, that's something to, I could write that down and stick it on the wall around my house. So every day remember that,
I mean, when I first heard those words come out of this one therapist's mouth, it was like a gunshot, to me. I mean, it just, my husband was there. And I mean, we both just like froze, and it was just like, oh my gosh. Yeah. I should make t-shirts and bumper stickers and posters and everything out of that one statement.
Yeah. There was something that, and this may be just out of left field, and it was right at the beginning of your book. And I thought of it because, and I don't know, it was important, a little important thing to me personally, but I noticed that at the beginning of the book, you basically, you said you were agnostic, but then you immediately, when you got that call, it was like you just were praying to God, the universe, like almost passionately. And I thought that was kind of an interesting thing because I've been through that kind of experience myself, and I know a lot of people who do, and I wonder what that is in human beings, like when we hit a wall. Like, I mean, I was there just a few weeks ago. My father-in-law passed away, and I got the call like 12 o'clock at night, and I had to go drive and tell my wife, and it was a whole heavy experience. But I remember when I hung up, I just fell on my knees and just yelled to the sky. And I mean, yelled to the universe, yelled to God. I accept death fully, but it was still painful, and I just wonder what that is. It's like something deep and primal in us that when we are just at our wits' end, we just cry out into the void,
Right.
Is that kind of what that felt like? Like,
yeah, I mean, I think I felt so out of control, and that I just, I felt like if there is somebody out there who has control, then please, like,
let me know, look at me, can you see
let
me,
see what's going on, let me know what to do. I mean, I think it was being so lost and feeling lost, so out of control, and just not having any idea how I was going to figure out what was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And so I would just, so it was, there was a lot of prayer, even though, I am, I do identify as agnostic, but I'm not going to get into the whole like spirituality, the universe and things. I mean, I believe in something.
You believe in something,
don't know what I believe in.
But like in that moment, like it felt valid to just kind of cry out to that. Yeah, that's interesting. We've all been there.
It was just like someone, if there is some, force,
witness me. Are you watching me? Like I get it. I mean, like, yeah, for some that's just like the crack, the chink. It's like, okay, I'm out. I don't know what to do. I mean, I've been there. It's like wit's end. What do I do? And then sometimes it's a crying out. So you wrote this book because, I mean, it sounds like you were writing before, from what I gathered. You had a blog, and you were keeping sort of like an ongoing account of your experience, and then it forms into a book because you you had went to groups and things like that, support groups, but you really hadn't found people that were had experienced what you'd experienced, which was, no signs until 13, and then,
Right.
Bam.
Right. Yeah. So I'd been writing off and on for a few years, but actually when I was writing a blog, it had nothing to do with my daughter.
Okay.
Or my kids really. And actually once she came out, I stopped blogging because because there was a period where she was out to us and not out to the rest of the world. Obviously I can't just blog about her when
I see. Okay, gotcha. Yeah.
So I actually stopped blogging when she came out, but I was, writing articles here and there about other things. And really the reason I started just private journaling and writing a little bit for myself, privately, with not necessarily knowing if it would ever get shared.
I see.
After she came out. And the reason really I decided to write my memoir and write our story is that when she came out, I looked for other books, and all the other books that I found at that time, all were about, kids who presented in childhood, 3, 4, 5 years old. And I couldn't find books about kids who came out later and didn't have any signs.
Yeah.
There's been, fortunately, just in the last couple of years, there's been more people writing about their experience, and that narrative has, changed more. But I felt like, and when I went to the support group meeting is when, for other families with trans kids, was the first time that I finally met some other parents whose kids also hadn't had signs when they were little and who had come out later. And that's when I really started to accept Ava myself. And so I wanted there to be, more stories out there about these kids who don't present in childhood and are coming out later, and the parents are completely blindsided by it, so that, if this happens to somebody else and they've read my story, they'll have heard a story like that and know that not all trans kids have signs when they're little kids, and they'll listen to their kid and consider it as a possibility and not, immediately dismiss their child the way I dismissed Ava when she first came out.
Yeah, and that's a great gift of your book. I really think that's one of those things that people are going to be able to read for years to come. I mean, because there's going to be people that are in your shoes, that they're going to be looking for a light. They're going to be the ones that are going to be getting phone calls or getting wailing into the sky, going, okay, what do I do? What do I do? And it's a good work, I think, that you were willing to share like that. How does Ava feel about the book? I mean, has it been a good experience for her?
Yeah, she's really very proud of it. I mean, before writing it, I got her okay to write it and told her what time frame I was going to include in it, and made sure my husband was okay with me writing it because he's her father, he's her father. And so, and that's really the only people whose approval I asked for was my husband's and Ava's. And, Ava is herself very loud and proud and active. And so she really was okay with the story being shared, so that it would hopefully help other trans young people who come out to their parents as well. So she's been doing well, and she's proud of the book. She's put it on her social media, and otherwise she's just as almost a 17-year-old who is living her life and not too concerned about what her mom is doing. So
it is interesting because that just kind of gets right back to what I took away from the book was a lot of the stuff that is really just filtered through our own fear. Because to the kids, they're like rolling with it. It's like, look, I just want you to accept me. I'm good if you can. I can make the rest of my way. They just want that. Right. The other thing I would say about, I don't have a transgender child, but, having read the book, I think other people are going to be able to find common connections. And then the one thing is just how big can you let your heart be? It helped me examine some of my own biases that I still have kicking around in there. And, and it's a testament to what we can accept, because I think we tell ourselves lies. I really do. I tell myself lies all the time, like, oh, I could never accept that, or I'd never say it out loud that I couldn't accept it, but somewhere deep down I feel like there's lines and fences. They're not there really. If you really, really allow yourself, your heart can get bigger, and so can your mind, and that's a beautiful thing.
I mean, that was part of why I wanted to write this, is that I wanted to show that you can go from being completely devastated and thinking that this is something you cannot and will not accept, to not just accepting, but, thriving and, really having your life be enhanced and enriched by an experience that you didn't think you could ever get through. And I think really the message is, do not underestimate your capacity to evolve and grow with your child if you open your heart and open your mind and listen to what they're saying to you.
Yeah.
And, that can apply to anybody, and any parenting situation as well, or just in general in life.
Yeah, right. Exactly. I mean, give yourself an opportunity. And what a great strength that is, right? I mean, it's something I want to remind myself daily, is how much more can I love people, or how much more am I willing to make room for them? Am I the kind of being that builds walls and fences, or do I want to build a bigger house for them to all live in? I know which one I want to be, and I know the work I need to do, but I can't do it if I don't go through the stuff. And sometimes that's like the part we don't want to do. We don't want to go through the painful stuff. We just want to just say it and be loving and compassionate. But it's something that we have to learn. I mean, we have to go through things, I think, to learn it.
Right.
Yeah.
And, I think a lot of times, people fear what they don't know. So, if you feel like you don't know, a trans kid or a family with a trans kid, or just, transgender people, and you may have, it's natural to have fear and bias towards something that, feels, foreign to you. But then, if you hopefully, if you read my book, and another topic, you read about, somebody else's experience, and then you feel like you got to know that person, you got to be in their shoes for a few days, and and you live their experience, then that fear of the unknown goes away, because I think memoir in particular is a way where we get to really experience somebody else's experience.
Yeah. And I know that's the kind of world I'd like to live in. That's the kind of country I want to live in too. I mean, that to me is, I walk outside and I have an American flag hanging off my home. And when I look at that, I think, man, this experiment here could be about that, exactly what you just described. It could be that's like the greater idea even, that maybe where we've already went. And so maybe the painfully where we're going, as ugly as it may look today, maybe this is just like the growing pains. Maybe we can get to that place where we are a symbol for that again, where it's like, how big and all-inclusive can we be? And show the human family that, it is a big melting pot, and it's a beautiful thing, and I think it takes works like yours and sharing that, just as you said, for us to be able to step into other people's shoes and do that.
I hope it is the growing pains. I really do hope this is the growing pains, and that we're going to come out, better and stronger and more all-inclusive for it. I really do. Yeah,
me too. That's what I hope for too. I see sometimes in my son a little bit of resentment towards those ideas, or even the symbols of those ideas, because he's like, yeah, but I'm not really represented under that. And I'm like, yeah, I get it. You're right. He's not fully, he's not fully protected and fully accepted or represented. But, but he could be. And I know that's terrible today, but I believe there's still a possibility for that. It may not, the loud voices don't tend to make us believe that, but I want to believe it. But the only way that happens is for people like you to do the work you're doing, and for us to share, like you said, these stories, and hopefully get our brothers and sisters out there to open their hearts and minds a little more.
And have conversations to each other and really listen to each other. And
right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hello, Good News listeners and friends. It's time for the Fishing for Goodies segment of Find the Good News, where I take a back seat and let the questions from the Good News Fishbowl take over the interviewer role. If you're a longtime listener, then you know that normally there was an ad right here for the Brimstone Museum and Henning Cultural Center in Sulphur, Louisiana, my hometown and the place where I produce Find the Good News. Thanks to the devastation caused by Hurricane Laura, instead of an ad, I'm making an appeal. Hurricane Laura, the strongest hurricane to hit Louisiana in over 150 years, made landfall on the crossover hours between Wednesday, August 26th, and Thursday, August 27th. This monster storm made a straight path from my hometown, Sulphur, and her sister city, Lake Charles, Louisiana. I evacuated that Wednesday evening ahead of the storm, and returned the Friday after, and one of the most heartbreaking things I saw was the devastation of our historic treasure, the Brimstone Museum. Trying to describe the scale of the damage to southwest Louisiana escapes words. Every resource imaginable was brought to its knees: utilities, water, gas, food, shelter, and medical. Life instantly returned to a cycle of shoring up supplies to survive the coming heat, humidity, stabilization, and recovery. While national news media has moved on, the multi-layered human suffering remains, especially for our poorer communities made even more vulnerable in the aftermath of this savage storm. The road to recovery will be long, and many of the decisions and actions of our national, regional, and local politicians could be put under well-deserved scrutiny at this time. But what can't be criticized is the goodwill, mercy, compassion, tenderness, and drive to help that we've seen from local and regional volunteers. Each day they bring hot food, water, cleaning supplies, tarps, gasoline, and set up every single day in parking lots serving from sunrise to dusk. One particular organization, Care Help of Sulphur, mobilized immediately. Volunteers selflessly putting their own needs aside to care for the citizens of Sulphur with all of their varied needs. I've put a link to the website of Care Help of Sulphur on my website, as well as some reflections and links, photos, and video about what we are facing right here in Sulphur, Louisiana, the home of Find the Good News. You can find that at findthegood.news/donate. That's findthegood.news/donate. The link is also in this episode's show notes. In fact, this episode was produced on power provided by the loving gifts and efforts of this podcast guests and listeners. Any help offered to Care Help of Sulphur or Find the Good News in the aftermath of Hurricane Laura is deeply appreciated. Brimstone Museum will be saved and hold this spot once again someday. Care Help will continue to serve the people of this city. Good people will always rise up to do good works when there is a need. Now, let's take that dive in the fishbowl. So at the end of every show, I give up my role of asking questions and I turn it over to this fishbowl right here.
Oh, okay.
It's got 400 questions in here, but what we do is we draw 3 for each guest, and they're random.
Oh,
so
sorry.
I'm going to pull 3 questions out.
This is
and
the first.
Yeah, I hadn't done a game yet, huh?
It's the first time I'm doing this, so.
Well, this will be fun. So let's see what we get. Yeah, this is where the universe takes over. So.
Right. Yes.
Okay. Well, this is a tough question, I think. I'd have to think about this. So, what are you the most scared of losing, and what would you truly lose if you lost it? That's a big question.
That is a huge question.
It's very big.
I mean, I think I'm most scared of losing the ability to make decisions and choices for myself.
Interesting answer. Yeah.
Autonomy.
Autonomy.
And if I lost that, I would just be losing myself altogether.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's interesting because I know this isn't related, but I guess coming out of the loss of a loved one recently and going through the funeral process and having done that before, I've had that thought a few times. When I lost my father and when my wife lost hers, I thought, we're all ultimately left to whoever's left to sort of, we lose full autonomy at that point. They're going to memorialize you and hopefully do things that you would like. And some of it's for them too, but you have no control. It's done.
Right.
Your autonomy is sort of gone at that point. So in a way, I get it. It's like losing autonomy is the ultimate letting go. It's tough.
Right. At first, I was going to say losing, not having control is my biggest fear, but it's sort of along the line. And then I thought autonomy is really the better way to say that. But
yeah, I get that. That's tough. It's tough for all of us, right? It's kind of like being imprisoned or anything. It's like, now you're eating when you're told to eat, and now you're wearing what you're told to wear. Those are things that's interesting too, because that kind of ties into your book, because it got me thinking about school uniforms and clothing and identity, because I'm not a fan of school uniforms at all. Some people love them. I hate them. I never liked them. And, our community, everybody wears them. Well, now we're all on lockdown, with COVID. And so a lot of kids are doing online school. And so they're wearing whatever they want to online school. And one of the schools had put out a thing saying, about the school uniforms that they have to wear for online schooling. And I thought, oh my gosh, let this go. Come on, these kids, you want to talk about identity issues. Kids' clothing is a way for you to express yourself. And there are some kids that really feel more comfortable in certain apparel, And I thought, we just layer it on kids. We make it so hard for them. We wonder why, I think sometimes because we take their autonomy away completely. We take their expression away. And we're asking them to just fit into all these shapes that just aren't made for them, I think, sometimes. Good answer. That was a good answer. Autonomy. I'm going to think about that one for a while. Okay, this is a good question. How could you add more value to your relationships?
I actually think I have pretty good relationships.
Good.
To tell you the truth. I feel like in the last really few years, I have actually pared down my relationships to the ones that sort of matter the most.
Yeah.
And so I feel like I already have, but I think I could sometimes be a little bit of a better listener.
Listening is hard, especially if you're an assertive person and you're a thinker. Because I get it. I try to listen, but especially in having lots of conversations like these, listening is a part of it, but it's a give and take. You have to share, if you're having a thought that you think there's value in, you want to share with that person, but it's mainly to have them, to get to know them better, So yeah, listening, I get that. Being a good listener would be a high, something to cultivate. Any of us could do that.
Yeah. Because sometimes I will find myself a friend is telling me something and you're already sort of formulating your thought and your answer before they've had a chance to finish, what they're telling you. So I am guilty of that here and there. Yeah, for sure.
I hear you. I've been that way. It depends on what it is. On this show, sometimes it's like that because you want to keep, you still sort of have a commitment to keep the show going, right? So you have to have some feedback, but at the same time, you don't want to. I've had things though. I've noticed that on this show so many times. I'm like, they just said this. I've got to ask them this question, but the natural flow of the conversation just moves on, and I won't even think of it again until after I'm editing it, and I go, I never got to ask them this question. Yeah. So I always hope that someone else will ask it later in another interview.
Right.
Okay, so this is your last question from the fishbowl. Are you happy with your current work-life balance? If not, what would balance look like to you?
Ooh, that is a really hard question you asked me there. I think I was um, getting to pretty happy with work-life balance pre-COVID. Post-COVID, work has, for just my work as a pediatrician has gotten a lot more stressful for a variety of reasons. That could be its own separate show, so
Right.
we won't really go there. But I think work-life balance for me would be. I feel like I have so many interests and also things that I don't even know if I might be interested in if I tried. So work-life balance for me would be better if I was able to actually pursue everything that I'm intrigued about.
Oh, wow, yeah. I hear you. I understand that completely. Completely. We're all multidimensional. I was thinking about that when I was reading your bio before I read your book. I was like, wow, she's got so many interesting things. She's marathon runner. She does yoga. She's a pediatrician. She wrote this book. And then it keeps going on and on. And I was like, wow, man, so many, you draw circles around those, and that's sort of the atom of your life, and I'm sure there's more,
Right.
Yeah.
So
it's hard to balance.
Overall, I think I've done a pretty good job at work-life balance, and being able to have the these other outside interests while still practicing as a pediatrician. But I would like even a little bit more.
Yeah.
So
well, don't we all want more harmony? Yeah. I get it. I do. So the last question is not out of the fishbowl, and it's something I've been asking people for at least 60 episodes or so, and it's a question that my family and I ask each other at the end of the day. We used to say, how was your day? And that sort of left a lot of room for some negative things potentially to come through, but we realized if we focused on the positive, we'd be more grateful. And so instead of asking, how was your day? We ask, did anything good happen today? And so I ask that of you. Did anything good happen today?
I really think the best thing that happened today is that you and I connected in this interview.
Oh, great.
We would not, I think, we probably would not otherwise ever have met each other or gotten a chance to talk to each other or know each other. And for me, an opportunity to really have a conversation with somebody that I would not, otherwise meet.
Right.
That human connection is more important than anything else. So,
gosh, I love that you said that, because I agree. I mean, you kind of said that at the beginning that we really probably we don't have the same experience, but yet there's still common ground. Boy, isn't that a beautiful thing? I think that's the most beautiful thing. That's how we...
That's a common ground.
Yeah. I mean, that's how we make peace in this world, I think, is when we look for that stuff. Like, where are we connected at? And the only way to do it's through intimate conversations, I think. You can't just scan over somebody. Like, someone can't just look at your book and go, oh, that's about something related to transgender. I'm not going to read that, or I'm not interested. They need, read things, consume things that, especially the things I think that you have these impulses to pass over. Maybe that's the thing I've tried to do, like cultivate that, man. You're going to meet so many more people. Your mind's going to grow. Your heart's going to grow. That's a beautiful thing. I'm glad. Thanks for sharing that. I had the same experience. I think your book's a treasure, and like I said, I'm about 75, little more % done. So I'm going to finish it up and share it with some folks.
Thank you. The last chapters, you might want to have a box of tissues around for the last
chapter. That's what I was hoping. I wanted to finish it, and I things kept coming up, and I said, man, I'm just so close. But I think I'm excited to share it with my wife too. You know, I typically read these books before I do an interview, and then I passed it on to her. And really, I hope that people will listen to our conversation and pick up the book too. Is there a preferred vendor of your choice as far as?
No, really anywhere they can get books: Amazon, Barnes and Noble, IndieBound for their local independent bookstore. Whatever way they prefer.
Okay,
it's fine.
All right, guys. So the book is Found in Transition, A Mother's Evolution During Her Child's Gender Change. This was Paria Hassouri, MD. And I thank you so much for your time today. I really did enjoy it, and I can't wait to share it with folks.
Thank you so much.
I'm more thankful every moment that I found.
Thanks for listening to my Beacon Series conversation with Paria Hassouri, MD. If you'd like to experience Paria's book, Found in Transition, make sure to visit the links in the show notes. If you found something of use in this conversation, consider visiting findthegood.news/donate, where you can help this good news mission and organizations working to help in the historic aftermath of Louisiana's 2020 hurricane season. I thank you for pressing play and for syncing up with this good news beacon.